The transport ship shook as it entered the atmosphere of Vorthok Prime. Hyanwu. Kim gripped his seat and watched the red jungle spread below through the small window. The planet looked like a wound against the black of space. Everything here was the color of blood. First time on a death world, human? The voice belonged to Commander Vexstar, a 7-foot-tall reptilian with scales like green armor. He had heard this opinion many times during his journey to the research station. The other species in the galaxy thought humans were weak, too soft to survive without their machines and weapons. The ship landed with a heavy thud on the metal platform of Research Station Alpha 7 through the opening doors. Hyanwu could hear the sounds of the jungle. Strange bird calls echoed through the air. Something large crashed through the trees in the distance. The air smelled of flowers and decay. "Welcome to paradise," said Dr. Neri Park as she met him at the landing pad. She was the only other human at the station, a xenobiologist who had been studying the planet's creatures for 2 years. Her face was tanned from the red sun, and her eyes looked tired. "I hope you're ready for this place. It wants to kill everything that doesn't belong here." Hyanwu followed her into the station. The metal corridors were cold compared to the humid air outside. Other researchers moved past them without speaking. A tall insectoid with 4 arms clicked its mandibles in what might have been greeting or warning. 2 crystalline beings made of living rock ignored them completely. "The team doesn't like humans much," Nari said quietly as they walked. "They think we only made it to space because we got lucky. They say we're too weak to be real predators." "What? Do you think?" Hyanwu asked. Nari shrugged. "I think they've never seen what humans can do when they have to survive. Those things are the reason this planet is classified as a death world." Enter the main laboratory. Holographic displays showed the jungle from above. Red dots marked the locations of various creatures. Most of the dots moved in patterns, but some areas of the map were completely dark. "Those are Shadow Maw territories," Nari explained, pointing to the dark zones. "Can't get sensor readings. There. Something about the creatures interferes with our equipment. What we do know is that they're the apex predators of this world. 12 feet tall, built like killing machines, and smart enough to use tools." Commander Vexstar entered the lab with heavy footsteps. Behind him came the rest of the research team. Kliktar, the young insectoid researcher, looked nervous. The 2 crystalline beings, Gorth and Nexus, stood like living statues. "You will stay in the station and file reports. You will not interfere with real research. This world is too dangerous for your kind." Hyanwu nodded politely. "I understand. I'm here to learn and observe." Kliktar made a chittering sound that might have been laughter. "The human thinks he can learn about apex predators by watching screens. On my world, we settle disputes by combat. Humans would not last 5 minutes against real hunters." "On my world," added Gorth in a voice like grinding stone, "only the strongest survive the crystal storms. Humans need their soft beds and cooked food. They are domesticated creatures now." The insults continued for several minutes. Hyanwu listened. Without responding, he'd learned long ago that arguing with prejudice was useless. Better to let actions speak instead of words. That evening, the team prepared for a routine survey mission. They would collect plant samples from the edge of Shadow Maw territory. Standard procedure required full combat gear and energy weapons. "Human stays here," Vexstar announced as he checked his plasma rifle. "This mission requires speed and strength. We cannot waste time protecting weak links." Hyanwu watched from the observation deck as the team left the station. They moved in formation across the jungle floor, their sensors scanning for threats. Within an hour, Kliktar's voice crackled over the communication system, high with panic. "Station Alpha 7, this is Survey Team 1. We have lost Kliktar. Repeat, researcher Kliktar is missing. Something took him into the dark zone." Vexstar's voice came next, tight with controlled fear. It was a Shadow Maw, biggest one I've ever seen. It came out of nowhere and grabbed the insectoid. We pursued, but lost the trail at the cave systems. Request immediate extraction. The team returned to base 3 hours after dark. Vexstar's armor showed deep claw marks across the chest plate. Gorth had a crack running through his crystal body. The creature was massive, Vexstar reported. To the station log, silver eyes like stars. It moved like liquid shadow. When we tried to follow, it led us into a maze of caves and traps. We barely escaped with our lives. What about Kliktar? Hyan Wu asked. Dead Vexstar said flatly. Nothing survives being taken by a shadow maw. The creature probably consumed him within the hour. There is no point in attempting rescue. The team gathered in the common area to mourn their lost colleague. They shared stories of Kliktar's research and his dreams of understanding alien ecosystems. But underneath their grief was anger. This is what happens when we work with humans, Gorth rumbled. They bring weakness. They make us soft and careless. Kliktar died because we were distracted, added Nexus, watching out for human feelings instead of real threats. Hyan Wu said nothing. He listened to their anger and their pain. He understood that they needed someone to blame. But deep in his mind, he was thinking about what Vexstar had described. It's a shadow maw that used strategy and traps. A creature that led pursuers away from its territory instead of simply killing them. That suggested intelligence. And intelligence meant the possibility of communication. Long after the others had gone to sleep, Hyan Wu sat in the observation deck and studied the jungle. The red trees swayed in the night wind. Strange lights flickered in the darkness where bioluminescent creatures moved through the canopy. Somewhere out there, Kliktar might still be alive. The team had assumed death because that's what they expected from an apex predator. But what if they were wrong? What if the shadow maw had taken the insectoid for reasons other than hunger? Hyan Wu made his decision. Assumption cost a life. At dawn, he would do what his colleagues thought impossible. Member of any species had ever tried, he would seek out the apex predator and try to communicate with it. The others would call him soft and foolish. They would say he was proving their point about human weakness. But Hyan Wu knew something they didn't understand. Sometimes what looked like weakness was actually a different kind of strength. Outside, the jungle called with voices of 1,000. Unknown creatures. Thought it knew about predators and prey? Hyan Wu left the station before dawn. The red sun had not yet risen above the jungle canopy, and the air was thick with morning mist. He carried only basic supplies: water, dried food, a simple knife, and a small medical kit. No energy weapons, no heavy armor, no communication devices that might alert the shadow maw. To his presence, the other researchers would not discover his absence for hours. By then, he would be deep in the jungle where their sensors could not track him. They would probably assume he had panicked and run away. Another example of human weakness. The jungle floor was soft under his feet. Layers of fallen leaves made each step silent. Hyan Wu moved slowly, reading the signs that the survey team had missed in their rush and fear. Broken branches showed where something large had passed. Claw marks on tree bark indicated territorial boundaries. The pattern of disturbed earth told a story of pursuit and capture. Kliktar had been taken alive. Insectoid's four-clawed feet had left deep scratches in the ground as he was dragged away. But there was no blood trail. A predator that killed immediately would have left. Evidence of violence. This shadow maw had been careful not to harm its captive. The trail led deeper into the jungle than the research team had dared to follow. Here, the trees grew taller, and their branches blocked most of the red sunlight. Strange flowers glowed with their own light, creating patches of blue and green in the crimson shadows. The air hummed with the sound of insects and the distant calls of creatures that had no names in any galactic database. Hyan Wu paused at a stream to drink and study his surroundings. The water was clear but tasted of metal and strange minerals. Small fish with too many eyes swam in the shallows. On the far bank, something large had left footprints in the mud. Not shadow maw prints, but something else. Something that walked on two legs like a reptilian, but was much heavier. A sound made him freeze. Footsteps in the undergrowth, slow and careful, but coming closer. Hyan Wu crouched behind a fallen log and controlled his breathing. Through the leaves, he saw movement. Gray shapes slipping between the trees. Pack hunters, 6 of them each. The size of a large wolf, but with razor-sharp claws and rows of needle teeth. Their skin was mottled gray and black, perfect camouflage in the jungle shadows. The research files called them razor claws. They hunted in coordinated groups and could bring down prey 10 times their size. The pack leader stopped 20 feet from Hyan-Wu's hiding place. Its nostrils flared as it tested the air. It had caught his scent, but was confused by what it smelled. Humans were not native to this world. The creature had no instinctive response to an unknown species. Hyan-Wu understood pack behavior from Hyan-Wu. Studying Earth's wolves and wild dogs, these creatures were curious but cautious. They would investigate but not attack immediately unless they felt threatened. The key was to appear neither aggressive nor afraid. He stood up slowly, making himself visible. The pack tensed but did not flee. The leader tilted its head, studying this strange creature that smelled like meat but showed no fear. Hyan-Wu began to back away toward a narrow passage between 2 large trees, not running, but moving with careful purpose. The pack followed. But the narrow space forced them to approach in single file instead of surrounding him. Their numbers became meaningless. When the leader came close enough to snap at his legs, Hyan-Wu simply stepped aside and continued backing up the steep slope behind the trees. The razor claws followed for another 100 meters before losing interest. This strange prey was not running or fighting. It was not acting like food. The pack leader gave a short bark, and the hunters melted back into the jungle to seek easier targets. Hyan-Wu continued following Kliktar's trail. The morning grew. Hotter as the red sun climbed higher. Sweat soaked his clothes, and strange insects buzzed around his head. Some bit him, leaving small welts that burned and itched. Others seemed merely curious about this unusual visitor to their domain. The trail led to a region where the trees grew even larger. Some were so wide that 20 people holding hands could not circle their trunks. The canopy was so thick here that very little sunlight reached the ground. Glowing fungi provided most of the light, creating an otherworldly landscape of blues and purples. Here, Hyan-Wu found the first real sign of the shadow maw. Claw marks on a tree trunk, but not random. Scratches. These marks formed patterns, symbols. The scratches were too precise and orderly to be accidental. They looked almost like writing. He photographed the marks with his basic camera and continued following the trail. More marked trees appeared, each bearing different symbols. Some marks were fresh, made within the last day. Others were older, weathered by rain and time. This was not random territory marking. This was systematic communication. The trail ended at a cliff face made of black crystal. The rock formation rose hundreds of feet into the misty air. At its base, a cave opening yawned like a hungry mouth. The entrance was wide enough for something very large to pass through easily. Kliktar's footprints led directly into the cave and disappeared into darkness. Hyan-Wu studied the cave entrance. More symbols were carved into the crystal walls. These were deeper and more elaborate than the tree markings. Some appeared to be pictographs showing stick figures of various species: humans, reptilians, insectoids, and others. But the human figures were different somehow. They were shown interacting with larger shapes that could only be shadow maws, ancient artwork. This cave system was not just a lair, it was a place of significance, perhaps even a sacred site. The cave mouth exhaled cool air that carried strange scents, musk, and moisture, and something else. Something that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Hyan-Wu activated his small flashlight and stepped into the darkness. The cave was larger inside than it appeared from outside. His light revealed smooth walls that had been deliberately shaped and carved. Channels cut into the floor carried water from underground springs. Side passages branched off in multiple directions, creating a complex network of tunnels and chambers. But most impressive were the wall paintings. Dozens of them, depicting scenes of life on Vorthok Prime. Shadow maws, hunting in packs. Families of the creatures raising young, and strangest of all, images of shadow maws interacting peacefully with other species, including primitive humanoid figures. This was not the lair of a mindless beast. This was the home of an intelligent species with its own culture and history. Haiyan followed the main passage deeper into the mountain. His footsteps echoed in the silence, but he was not afraid. The cave paintings had changed his understanding of what he might find here. The shadow maw that had taken Kliktar was not acting from simple hunger. It had brought the insectoid here for a reason. The passage opened into a vast chamber, lit by glowing crystals in the walls. And there, suspended in a web of organic fibers, near the center of the space, was Kliktar. The insectoid was unconscious but breathing. His body showed no signs of injury. He was alive. But he was not alone. Silver eyes opened in the darkness across the chamber. Then another pair, and another. Yuan was not facing one shadow maw. He was surrounded by an entire pack of the creatures, and they had been waiting for him to arrive. The largest of them stepped into the crystal light. 12 feet of midnight black fur and muscle, claws like curved daggers, a face that combined feline grace with predatory intelligence. But those silver eyes held no malice. They studied Haiyan with curious intensity. The creature made a sound, not a growl or roar, but something almost like speech, complex vocalization that carried meaning beyond simple animal communication. Hugh realized that everything the galaxy believed about shadow maws was wrong. They were not just apex predators, they were people. And now he had to find a way to communicate with them before they decided what to do with their two uninvited guests. The largest shadow maw moved closer to Haiyan with steps that made no sound on the crystal floor. Her massive paws spread wide to distribute her weight, and her silver eyes never left his face. The other pack members remained in the shadows. Watching, but not approaching, Haiyan forced himself to stay perfectly still. Every instinct screamed at him to run or reach for his knife. But he had studied enough predators to know that sudden movements would trigger an attack response. Instead, controlled his breathing and kept his hands visible and relaxed. The great creature stopped just outside arm's reach. This close, Haiyan could see the intelligence burning in those silver eyes. He could also see the scars that marked her dark fur. Long parallel lines across her shoulders spoke of battles with others of her kind. Twisted ears suggested a fight that had nearly cost her life. This was not just any shadow maw. This was an alpha female, a leader who had earned her position through strength and cunning. She circled him slowly, her massive head moving as she took in his scent. Haiyan remained motionless, letting her complete her inspection. When she came around to face him again, he noticed something that made his heart ache. Despite her fearsome appearance, there was loneliness in her eyes. The kind of isolation that came from being the last of something precious. The alpha made a sound deep in her throat. It's not a growl, but something more complex. It rose and fell like music, carrying emotions that transcended language. Haiyan recognized it as a question. She was trying to communicate with him. "I know you understand me," Haiyan said softly in Korean. His voice was calm and respectful. "I can see the intelligence in your eyes. Brought Kliktar here for a reason. You've been watching our research station. You know we're not from this world." The shadow maw tilted her head at the sound of his voice. She made another musical sound, different from the first. This one seemed almost like a greeting. Haiyan began to speak about Earth, using the gentle tone he might use with a frightened animal, but he was not talking down to her. He was sharing stories as he would with a friend. He told her about the great predators of his home world, tigers that ruled the forest with silent grace, bears that commanded respect through strength and dignity, wolves that understood the power of family and cooperation. "We learned to live with them," he said. "Not as masters and servants, but as neighbors who shared the same world. We respected their strength, and some of them came to trust our intentions." The alpha listened to his words, but more importantly, she listened to the tone of his voice. Animals across the galaxy might not understand language, but they all understood intention. Fear carried the same scent everywhere. Aggression had the same sound. And respect, genuine respect, had its own unmistakable quality. She moved closer, bringing her massive head down to his eye level. Haiyan could feel her warm breath on his face. He could see his reflection in her silver eyes. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two intelligent beings from different worlds, trying to bridge a gap that millions of years of evolution had created. Slowly, carefully, Hyan-Woo raised his hand, not to touch her, but to offer it palm up in the universal gesture of peaceful intent. The Shadow Moss sniffed his hand, taking in the complex scents that told her story of his life. Soap from the research station. The metal temps of recycled air. But underneath those alien smells was something else. Something that spoke of forests and mountains and wide open spaces under natural skies. She made a sound that was unmistakably approving, a deep rumble that vibrated through her chest. Then she did something that would have shocked the research team. She pressed her forehead gently against his outstretched palm. The gesture lasted only a moment, but it changed everything. In that brief contact, Hyan-Woo felt the weight of her loneliness and the depth of her intelligence. She was not a monster. She was a person trapped in a form that the galaxy feared and misunderstood. When she pulled back, the Alpha made a gesture with her massive paw. She pointed toward Kliktar, still unconscious in his organic cocoon. Then, she looked back at Hyan-Woo and made a series of sounds that were clearly a question. "You want to know why I came here?" Hyan-Woo said. "You want to know if I'm like the others who came before?" The Shadow Maw's ears perked forward. She understood more than he had hoped. Hyan-Woo moved slowly toward Kliktar, keeping his movements visible and non-threatening. The Alpha followed but did not interfere. The other pack members emerged from the shadows, forming a loose circle around them. Hyan-Woo counted 7 adults in total. Each bore scars that spoke of hard lives and harder choices. The cocoon that held Kliktar was made of some organic material that looked like spider silk, but felt different. It was warm and slightly elastic, more like a protective shell than a prison. Hyan-Woo could see that it was designed to keep the insectoid safe, rather than harm him. "You weren't planning to eat him," Hyan-Woo said to the Alpha. "You were studying him, trying to understand what he was." The great creature made an affirmative sound and moved to another part of the chamber. She gestured for Hyan-Woo to follow. On the far wall, barely visible in the crystal light, were more cave paintings. But these were recent, the paint still. Fresh, they showed the research station from above. Stick figures that clearly represented the different species working there. The reptilians with their angular bodies, the crystallines with their geometric shapes, the insectoids with their multiple limbs. And in one corner, barely sketched but unmistakably human, were 2 small figures. "You've been watching us since we arrived," Hyan-Woo said with growing understanding. "You know all about us, about our differences, about how the others treat my species." The Alpha returned to his side and made a complex series of sounds. She gestured to herself, then to him, then to the other pack members. The meaning was clear even without words. She was telling him about her own people, about how they had once been numerous but were now few, about how they had been misunderstood and feared by those who should have been their neighbors. Hyan-Woo felt a connection forming that went deeper than species or language. They were both outcasts in their own ways, both judged by appearance rather than character, both lonely in a galaxy that seemed to have no place for them. The Alpha approached Kliktar's cocoon and began to carefully tear it open with her claws. The insectoid stirred as the warm material fell away. His compound eyes opened and focused. On the massive predator looming over him, Kliktar's scream echoed through the chamber until he saw Hyan-Woo standing calmly beside the Shadow Maw. The sight was so impossible that it shocked him into silence. "It's all right," Hyan-Woo said gently. "She's not going to hurt us. I think she's been trying to understand us the same way we've been trying to understand her." The Alpha made a welcoming sound to Kliktar, who was still too stunned to respond. Then she moved to a pile of objects near the cave wall and returned with something that made Hyan-Woo's breath catch in his throat. Fresh fruit, water in a carved crystal bowl, and a piece of cooked meat that smelled delicious, that she had prepared. A meal for them, not as prey, but as guests, as they shared the simple food in the crystal chamber, surrounded by ancient paintings and living legends. Hyan-Woo realized that first contact between species didn't always happen in space or at diplomatic conferences. Sometimes it happened in a cave, between 2 lonely souls who recognized something familiar in each other's eyes. The Alpha, whom Hyan-Woo had begun to think of as Yunji after his fierce grandmother, settled beside them like a great cat. Her presence was no longer threatening. It was protective. It was comforting. She had accepted them into her pack, and in doing so, had opened a door that no one in the galaxy thought could exist. But getting back to the research station would be another challenge entirely. And explaining this miraculous encounter to species who believed humans were too soft to survive would be the greatest test of all. The journey back to the research station took most of the day. Yanji traveled with them through the first part of the jungle, moving like a shadow between the massive trees. Her pack followed at a distance, never visible, but always present. Haiyan-Wu could sense them watching from the canopy above and the undergrowth around them. Kliktar walked in stunned silence, his forelegs moving automatically while his mind tried to process what he had witnessed. Every few minutes he would look back at the great shape moving behind them and shake his head in disbelief. "No, this is impossible," he muttered for the 10th time. "Shadow Maws are killers. They don't communicate. They don't share food. They certainly don't escort prisoners back to safety." "Maybe we were wrong about what they are," Haiyan-Wu said quietly. "Maybe we saw what we expected to see instead of what was really there." Yoongi made a soft sound that might have been agreement. She had been listening to their conversation, and Haiyan-Wu was certain she understood more of their language than they understood of hers. When they reached the edge of Shadow Maw territory, Yoongi stopped. She would not go closer to the research station with its sensors and weapons. But before turning back, she approached Haiyan-Wu one last time. The great creature extended one massive paw toward him. Her claws, each as long as his fingers, emerged slowly from their sheaths. Hyun-Woo understood what she was offering. He rolled up his sleeve and held out his arm. Eunge's claws touched his skin with impossible gentleness. 3 parallel lines appeared on his forearm, deep enough to scar, but not deep enough to cause real damage. Blood welled up in the scratches, bright red against his pale skin. Then Yoongi did something that made Kliktar gasp. She pressed her own paw against a sharp piece of crystal rock until her black blood mixed with his red blood on his arm. The ritual was older than language, older than civilization. She was marking him as family. "Blood brother," Haiyan-Wu whispered, understanding flooding through him. "You're making me part of your pack." Yoongi touched her forehead to his. One more time, then disappeared into the jungle like smoke. But Haiyan-Wu could hear her voice calling from the trees, a haunting sound that echoed across the forest. Other voices answered from the distance. The pack was announcing his new status to everyone who had ears to hear. The research station sensors detected them when they were still a mile away. By the time they reached the landing pad, the entire team was waiting. Dr. Nari Park ran too. Meet them, her face pale with relief and confusion. "Haiyan-Wu, Kliktar, we thought you were both dead. The sensors showed you entering Shadow Maw territory, then nothing. How did you survive? How did you escape?" Commander Vexstar pushed past her, his yellow eyes burning with anger. "Where have you been, human? Your disappearance put the entire station at risk. We almost launched a full rescue mission." "I went to find Kliktar," Haiyan-Wu said simply. "And I did. It's possible," Gorth rumbled, his crystal body reflecting the station's lights. "The Shadow Maw took him. Nothing returns from their territory alive." Kliktar finally found his voice. "He's telling the truth. The human walked into the Shadow Maw den and negotiated our release. I saw it with my own eyes." The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. Dexa spoke first, her voice like grinding. "Stone, you expect us to believe that a soft human succeeded where our combat team failed? That you somehow convinced apex predators to release their prey?" "Look at his arm," Kliktar said quietly. All eyes turned to Haiyan-Wu's forearm, where 3 parallel scars were already forming. The wounds were too precise to be accidental, too ritualistic to be from an attack. Dr. Nari Park stepped closer, her xenobiology training taking over. "Those are pack marks. I've seen similar scarification in predator species across 12 different worlds. But they're always made by the pack leader to show acceptance of a new member." "That's impossible," Vexter snarled. "Shadow Maws don't have pack structures. They're solitary killers." "Everything we thought we knew about them is wrong," Haiyan-Wu said. "They're not just predators. They're people. They have culture, language, art. They've been watching us since we arrived, trying to understand who we are." The team stared at him as if he had claimed the ability to fly. The idea that the galaxy's most feared predators might be intelligent was too radical for them to accept. That night, the station's automated defenses registered an anomaly. Something large was approaching from the jungle, but it was moving too slowly to trigger an attack response. The duty officer was about to ignore the reading when Dr. Park called out from the observation deck. "Everyone needs to see this," she said, her voice tight with amazement. The research team gathered at the station's windows. In the red moonlight, a massive shape moved across the clearing toward the station's perimeter. Yunji emerged from the tree line and sat down just outside the defensive barrier, her silver eyes reflecting the station's lights. She called out a series of musical sounds that carried clearly through the night air. The call was repeated 3 times, then she waited in silence. "She's calling for someone," Nari whispered. "But who?" Hyan-Wu moved toward the station's exit. "She's calling for me." "Don't be insane." Vexstar blocked his path. "That creature will kill you the moment you step outside," Hyan-Wu said. "With quiet certainty, she won't." He walked to the station's airlock and cycled through to the outside. The research team watched in terrified fascination as he approached the massive predator without weapons or protection. Yunji rose to meet him, her movements graceful despite her size. She touched her nose to his hand in greeting, then began a complex ritual that left the watching aliens speechless. Using her claws, she carefully reopened the scars on his arm. Fresh blood welled up in the marks. Then she pressed her own paw against a sharp stone and let her blood mix with his again. This time she also touched her bloodied paw to her own forehead, marking herself with their combined blood. The symbolism was unmistakable. She was not just accepting him into her pack, she was declaring him her equal. Her brother Yunji threw back her massive head and called out to the night. The sound was answered from the jungle by voices that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The hidden pack was witnessing the ceremony and adding their approval to the ancient ritual. When the calling ended, Yunji looked directly at the research station's windows. Her silver eyes found each member of the team, holding their gaze for a moment before moving on. The message was clear. Hyan-Wu was under her protection now. Anyone who threatened him would answer to the entire pack. She touched her forehead to his one last time, then melted back into the jungle as silently as she had come. Inside the station, the research team stood in stunned silence. Everything they believed about humans, about shadow maws, about the nature of intelligence itself, had been challenged in the space of a few minutes. Vexstar was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "The soft human has been adopted by apex predators. This changes everything." Dr. Nari Park was already recording her observations, her scientific mind racing with the implications. If the shadow maws are truly intelligent, if they have complex social structures, then this planet isn't just a death world. It's a civilization we've been studying like animals in a cage. But perhaps the most significant change was in how they looked at Hyan-Wu when he returned to the station. The scars on his arm were no longer marks of violence. They were credentials that no university could provide and no military could earn. He had done something that no member of any known species had ever accomplished. He had been accepted as family by creatures that the galaxy feared above all others. The soft human was soft no longer. He was something entirely new. He was the bridge between worlds that no one had thought possible. And somewhere in the jungle, 7 voices called out in harmony, announcing to Vorthok Prime that the pack had gained a new brother. One who walked on 2 legs and spoke with a gentle voice, but whose heart beat with the courage of a true predator. The Galactic Council investigation ship arrived 3 days after the Blood Brothers ceremony. The massive vessel settled onto the expanded landing pad, like a metal mountain, its hull bearing the symbols of a dozen different species. From its cargo bay emerged a team of officials who looked like they had come to judge the end of the world. Leading them was Zenthera, crystalline bureaucrat whose body sparkled with authority and disapproval. Her geometric form towered over the research team as she reviewed the reports on her datapad. "Impossible claims require impossible proof," she announced, in a voice like breaking glass. "The Council has received reports of alleged communication between humans and class A apex predators. Such claims damage the credibility of xenobiological research and waste valuable council resources. Behind her stood Ko Minho, a human military specialist whose uniform was pressed to perfection. His face showed the kind of rigid discipline that came from years of trying to prove that humans belonged among the galaxy's warrior species. He looked at Hyenwu with obvious disgust. "This embarrasses our entire species," Minho said coldly. "Humans have worked for generations to overcome the stereotype that we're weak and emotional. Your fantasy stories about befriending monsters set us back decades." Dr. Nari Park stepped forward with her research files. "The evidence is substantial." Clicktar witnessed the interaction. "The scarification follows known pack bonding patterns. The cave paintings show clear signs of advanced intelligence. Delusions and coincidences? Xanthara dismissed. Predators sometimes play with their prey before consuming it. Primitive mark-making does not indicate sapience. If these creatures are truly intelligent, let this human demonstrate communication." Under controlled conditions, Commander Vexstar, still bearing his scars from the first encounter, spoke up reluctantly. "The human has shown abilities that our combat team could not match. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that our assumptions were incorrect." "Assumptions?" Minho's voice rose with indignation. "The only assumption here is that apex predators can be reasoned with like house pets. This soft thinking is exactly why humans are viewed as the galaxy's weakest link." The argument was interrupted by an urgent alarm from the station's communication center. The duty officer's voice crackled over the intercom with barely controlled panic. "All senior staff to the emergency center immediately." We have a code red. "Situation developing in Sector 7. The emergency center's main screen showed a three-dimensional map of the planet's surface. In the southern region, a cluster of red warning indicators pulsed like an infected wound. Long-range sensors detected an unauthorized mining operation, the duty officer reported. Crystalline extraction teams landed 6 hours ago and began deep core drilling in the southern cavern system. Initial scans showed no life signs, so they proceeded with standard strip mining protocols. Xanthara's geometric body flashed with anger. Those miners were ordered to wait for council approval. Their actions violate multiple safety protocols. "Not the worst part," the officer continued. "Asteroid storm has entered the system earlier than predicted. Gravitational effects are causing seismic instability across the planet. The mining operation triggered a massive cave-in. The entire team is trapped underground." The main screen shifted to show the disaster site. What had been a pristine forest was now a smoking crater surrounded by fallen trees and shattered rock. Emergency beacons blinked weakly from somewhere deep beneath the rubble. "How many miners?" Vexstar asked grimly. 15 crystalline workers and 3 supervisors. They have maybe 12 hours of air left in their emergency shelters. After that, The officer didn't need to finish the sentence. Minho stepped forward immediately. "I'll lead a rescue mission. My training includes underground combat and extraction." "Operations. Negative," Xanthara replied. "The cave system is completely unstable. Any rescue attempt would likely cause further collapses. You must wait for specialized equipment from the nearest council base." "That will take 18 hours minimum," Dr. Park protested. "They'll be dead by then." "Acceptable losses," Xanthara said coldly. "We cannot risk additional personnel on an impossible mission." Hanwoo studied the disaster site on the screen. The location was familiar. The southern cavern system bordered Shadow Maw territory. In fact, the mining operation had probably damaged or destroyed part of their ancient home. "There might be another way," he said quietly. All eyes turned to him. Minho laughed harshly. "Let me guess. You want to ask your imaginary monster friends for help. This is exactly the kind of soft thinking that gets people killed." "The Shadow Maws know those cave systems better than any scanner," Hyenwu continued. "They've lived there for thousands of years. If anyone can navigate the unstable passages, it's them." "Even if your delusions were real," Xanthara said dismissively, "why would apex predators risk their lives to save alien miners who destroy their habitat?" "Because that's what families do for each other," Hyenwu replied. "They help, even when it's dangerous." Minho's face flushed with embarrassment. This is insane. You're talking about monsters like they're people. Humans don't make alliances. With predators, we conquer them or we die trying. Then why are you so afraid to let me try? Why, Hyan-Wu asked calmly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zenthara's crystalline body flickered with calculation. From her perspective, the situation was perfect. If Hyan-Wu failed, it would prove that human claims of intelligence were fraudulent. If he succeeded, it would be dismissed as luck or trickery. Very well, she announced. You have 6 hours to demonstrate this alleged communication. If you can somehow convince these creatures to assist in the rescue, the Council will consider revising its classification of the species. If you fail, these fantasy reports will be permanently dismissed, and this planet will be opened for full industrial development. The stakes were higher than just the trapped miners. The future of the Shadow Maws, the research station, and humanity's reputation in the galaxy all hung on Hyan-Wu's ability to convince his blood sister to risk everything for strangers who had just destroyed part of her world. Minho assembled a full military rescue team with energy weapons and powered armor. When this fails, we'll handle the rescue the proper way, through strength and superior firepower. As the two teams prepared to depart, Dr. Park pulled Hyan-Wu aside. Are you sure about this? Fungi and her pack are killed trying to help us. Their species really will become extinct. Is saving 18 miners worth that risk? Hyan-Wu looked out at the red jungle, where his blood sister waited. She'll make her own choice. That's what intelligent beings do. They choose what's right, even when it's dangerous. The rescue mission would test more than just Hyan-Wu's bond with the Shadow Maws. It would test whether two completely different species could work together when everything was at stake. It would test whether strength came from weapons and armor, or from trust and understanding. Most importantly, it would test whether a soft human and an apex predator could prove to the galaxy that family meant more than species, and that courage came in forms that the universe had never seen before. The asteroid storm was growing stronger. Time was running out for everyone. The disaster site looked worse up close. The asteroid storm's gravitational pull had torn a wound in the planet's surface that stretched for miles. Broken trees lay scattered like matchsticks, and the air smelled of burning rock and metal. Deep underground emergency beacons pulsed weakly. Counting down the remaining time for the trapped miners, Hyan-Wu stood at the edge of the destruction with his small team. Dr. Park carried medical supplies and scanning equipment. Klikdar had volunteered to help, still amazed by his own rescue. Behind them, Minho's military unit set up their heavy equipment with loud efficiency. 4 hours remaining, Minho announced, checking his chronometer. When your fantasy fails, real soldiers will handle this situation. Hyan-Wu ignored the insult and walked to the center of the ruined area. The cave-in had destroyed something important. Among the broken stones, he could see fragments of crystal that had been carved with symbols. This had been a sacred place for the Shadow Maws, and the miners had turned it into rubble. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called, "Out!" in the way Yanji had taught him. The sound carried across the wasteland, rising and falling like music. Then he waited. For long minutes, nothing happened. Minho's team exchanged knowing looks. Zenthara monitored the situation from the research station, no doubt preparing her report about human delusions. Then the jungle at the edge of the destruction began to move. EUN-G emerged first, her massive form picking carefully through the debris. Behind her came the rest of her pack, 7 of the galaxy's most feared predators walking in single file. They moved with the dignity of royalty, surveying a burned palace. Minho's soldiers raised their weapons instinctively. "Hold fire," the human officer commanded, but his voice was tight with strain. "Let's see what the soft human's pets can actually do." Yunji approached Hyan-Wu and touched her forehead to his in greeting. But when she pulled back, her silver eyes were filled with grief and anger. This place had been special to her people, and now it was destroyed. She made a series of complex sounds, gesturing at the ruined caverns with her massive paws. Hyan-Wu didn't need translation to understand her meaning. Why should she help the people who had done this to her home? Because they're dying, Hyan-Wu said softly in Korean. And because you're better than they are, you have the power to choose mercy when they chose destruction. Lungi listened to his words, her head tilted in the way that meant she was thinking. Deeply around her, the pack waited for her decision. They would follow their alpha wherever she led, even if it meant risking their lives for strangers who had shown them no respect. The great predator walked to the edge of the cave-in and sniffed the air. Her enhanced senses could detect things that no scanner could find. She made a questioning sound and looked back at Hyan-Wu. "Yes," he said, understanding her question. "Oh, they're still alive down there, but not for much longer." Yunji made her choice. She threw back her head and gave a call that echoed across the wasteland. It was the sound of a pack leader accepting a dangerous mission. Her family answered with their own voices, pledging their support. What happened next amazed even Hyan-Wu. The Shadow Maws didn't just help with the rescue, they took charge of it. Yunji organized her pack with the efficiency of a military commander, assigning each member to specific tasks based on their abilities. 2 of the younger pack members had the smallest frames. They squeezed into cracks in the rubble that would have been impossible for anyone else to navigate. Their calls from deep underground guided the rescue effort, locating the exact position of each trapped miner. The largest pack members used their incredible strength to move boulders that would have required heavy machinery. They worked with careful precision, removing debris without causing further cave-ins. Their claws, designed for killing, became delicate tools for saving lives. Minho's military team found themselves following the Shadow Maw's lead. The predators knew the underground passages in ways that no amount of training could match. When unstable sections threatened to collapse, the pack held ceiling supports in place with their own bodies, while the soldiers evacuated trapped miners. "This is impossible," Minho muttered, as he watched a Shadow Maw gently carry an injured crystalline worker through a narrow tunnel. Apex predators don't cooperate with other species. They don't risk themselves for strangers. Maybe that's because no one ever asked them to. Dr. Park suggested as she treated the rescued miners. The most dangerous moment came when the largest air pocket was located. 12 miners were trapped in a chamber that could collapse at any moment. The only way to reach them was through a passage that was barely wide enough for a single person. Yunji studied the situation and made a decision that shocked everyone. She looked at Hyan-Wu and made a series of sounds that clearly meant climb on. "She wants me to ride her through the passage," Hyan-Wu said, hardly believing it himself. "Absolutely not," Minho snapped. "That creature could crush you or abandon you down there. It's suicide." But Hyan-Wu was already moving toward his blood sister, climbed onto her back, wrapping his arms around her powerful neck. Yunji made a reassuring sound and began the dangerous descent into the unstable tunnels. The journey through the collapsed cave system was like riding through a nightmare. Rocks fell around them as Yunji picked her way through passages that shifted and groaned with each movement. She never hesitated, never stumbled. She carried her human brother through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had been born to these caves. They found the trapped miners in a chamber that reeked of fear and exhaustion. The crystalline workers were barely conscious, their emergency air supplies nearly depleted. Hyan-Wu worked quickly to attach safety lines while Yunji used her body to shield them from falling debris. The evacuation took 2 hours. One by one, the Shadow Maws carried the miners through passages that human rescue equipment never could have navigated. They formed living chains to pass injured workers through the most dangerous areas. They used their enhanced senses to find safe routes through the maze of collapsed tunnels. When the last miner was brought to the surface, the asteroid storm was reaching its peak. The gravitational forces were tearing apart what remained of the cave system. The Shadow Maws had completed an impossible rescue with minutes to spare. As the medical teams treated the survivors, Zenthera arrived at the disaster site. The crystalline bureaucrat stared in stunned silence at the sight of her people being cared for by creatures she had dismissed as mindless beasts. One of the rescued miners, his crystal body cracked but healing, approached Yunji with obvious difficulty. He spoke in the formal language of his people, offering gratitude that transcended species barriers. The great predator touched her nose gently to his damaged form. accepting his thanks with royal dignity. Minho stood among his unused military equipment, watching as the shadow maws prepared to return to their jungle. His weapons and armor had proven useless. His training had been inadequate. A soft human and a pack of predators had succeeded where his strength had failed. "I don't understand," he said quietly to Haiyan-Wu. "How did you know they would help? How did you know they would risk everything for strangers who destroyed their home?" Haiyan-Wu watched as Yunji said goodbye to each rescued miner, her massive form moving with gentle care among the fragile beings she had saved. "Because I asked them to," he said simply. "And because when you treat someone like family, they become family. The strongest bond in the universe isn't fear or dominance. It's trust." Yunji approached him for a final farewell. She touched her forehead to his and made a sound that needed no translation. She was proud of what they had accomplished together, proud to call him brother. As the Shadow Maw pack disappeared into the jungle, their mission complete, the watching officials began to understand that everything they thought they knew about strength, far and weakness had been wrong. The soft human had not conquered the apex predators through force or technology. He had done something far more powerful and far more dangerous to those who ruled through fear. He had shown them kindness. Kindness, when offered to the right heart, could move mountains and save lives and change the galaxy itself. In the days that followed, Vorthok Prime was declared a protected world. The Shadow Maws were officially recognized as a sapient species. Throughout the galaxy, the story spread of the human who was considered soft until the day an apex predator named him Blood Brother. But Haiyan-Wu knew the real truth. He hadn't been soft at all. He had been exactly what the universe needed him to be. He had been brave enough to extend his hand to the darkness and trust enough to let something wild and wonderful reach back. And in doing so, he had proven that. Sometimes the greatest strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the courage to understand.